My deep thanking to all of you for hosting this initiative by our UNESCO chair. I'm Emanuela Colombo, and I'm really proud to host this meeting with high-level colleagues. We will be talking a little bit about the Energy Development Nexus, but before going into that direction, just let me a few minutes to introduce Politecnico di Milano and our UNESCO chair. Politecnico di Milano is a public university founded in 1863, and we mostly deal with engineering, architecture, and design. We have changed a little bit our vision and mission over the year, and today we are aiming at becoming a leading university in Europe and beyond, capable of guiding research and scientific and technological innovation to improve human life in a sustainable and responsible way. We are the first university in Italy, and our community is quite huge. We have more than 46,000 students at both Master of Science and the Bachelor, with a community of professors and lecturers, which is approximately 2,000. We have even a huge community of PhD students, which are the core of our research activity, and these are more or less some of the numbers here at Politecnico. We see despite we are a technical university and we do not deal with the humanities, we are more and more aware that within these big challenges, it's very crucial to put aside any technological aspect, also elements of humanities. And so we aim to become very relevant as far as sustainable development process is concerned. This is one of the reasons why we have we host 3 UNESCO chairs at the Politecnico di Milano. One UNESCO chair is in green chemistry, the other one is on cultural heritage, and the last one, which is also the first one to be launched in 2012, is sustainable energy, energy for sustainable development, which deals with sustainable energy. The UNESCO chair, which I'm proud to be the chairholder, is approaching its 10th year. And one of the topics we are going to discuss and to deepen within the UNESCO chair is the nexus between energy and development, in order to broaden our engineering perspective a little bit beyond the technology per se. The UNESCO chair works at the interconnection between our research activity, because we know that there are a lot of things we have to do in that area, but also our internationalization or cooperation policy, because in many of the cases we are working with our African counterparts, for instance. Just to mention a few of the things we have supported over the year. In terms of curricular education, we have now, it's 10 years now that we host a track within the Master of Science in Energy Engineering, which is fully dedicated to energy for development, where the students, aside of many things about renewable energies and efficiency, they learn how to deal with access to energy in developing countries, rural areas like African countries or other areas worldwide. It's quite relevant to hear that we have more than 100 students per year enrolled in this track. We also host a program which is supported by the Italian Agency of Cooperation, which is a program of scholarship, which is called Partnership for Knowledge, with quite a consistent number of scholarships, and Politecnico di Milano is hosting one of the platform which is related to sustainable energy, environment, and innovation. We have done quite a number of things in terms of long life learning in the energy sector, and we have worked also with our friends and colleagues that now I'm looking at the screen, Professor Da Silva, working together with Res for Africa and INL in order to train young professionals and ministerial officers in Africa on renewable energy solutions. we are now working, we are quite deeply engaged, and again, this is another adventure we are sharing with Professor Da Silva in one of the big call of the European Horizon project, the one that is called the LIPRI, implementing the long-term joint Europe-Africa Research and Innovation Partnership. And why I'm saying it's quite a peculiar exercise, because we are sharing the partnership with 83 partners from Europe and Africa, which you can imagine how difficult it is also to manage such a huge project, in which we have 34 countries, more or less 12 from Europe and 22 from Africa. There is one last thing I want to mention. We are working together strongly with the Ministry, with the Italian Ministry of Education, in order to launch, and we have already set up a foundation, which is a university foundation made by 6 big universities in Italy: Politecnico di Milano, University of Bologna, University of Naples, Sapienza, University of Rome, University of Florence, and University of Padova. And together with them, we aim to launch the first transnational education initiatives at Italian level. The idea is to support as much as we can and share as much as we can education with Africa University. We have 3 pillars at this stage of the evolution of the project. One is an action which has been called virtual mobility. We have activated this action, let's say, during the lockdown, during the pandemic emergency, in order to support some of the African universities which were not in the capacity to host or to transfer their teaching activities online, to allow to the students to follow up courses at Politecnico di Milano, and then to have these courses being recognized in their own university. We have just launched yesterday the call for the specializing master, which is a kind of master which is supposed to... Annulla, Manuela, cosa succede qua sul tuo schermo? Which is supposed to be dedicated to young lecturers and young researchers that are hosted in African university, with special attention to the Horn of Africa. So this is a kind of program that in a 1-year teaching activity will try to support the upgrading of the local university. And the last point, which is the core of the activities, but it will take a little bit longer, is to establish some dedicated bachelors, which will be part of the Italian system, so they will be Italian titles, but delivered in one African countries. Nowadays, we are discussing with Ethiopia, let's say, with the Horn of Africa. The first courses will be probably on, let's say, environmental engineering and energy and industrial engineering, with a major on energy, and also on the agri-food supply chain. So that's more or less all from my side to give some flavor of some of the activities that we are running in cooperation with the UNESCO, with our UNESCO chair, Energy for Sustainable Development. It's not new, it's not a surprise that we are going to deepen a little bit the energy development nexus, looking at the perspective, let's say, looking at the problem from the perspective of the people. Even if we are engineers, we are perfectly aware that the people need to be placed back at the center of the economic activities or of the technological approach that we use. There are a number of reasons out of it. And I think that you, the high-level panelists that we are going to give the floor in a while, will have their strong contribution to bring in this exercise. I just placed on this slide some quotation that try to raise a little bit our ambition. And just I want to call for the last one from George Bernard Shaw. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So my suggestion and my best wish is that we try to be a little bit unreasonable, because this is the only way that we have to change things. So having said that, I'm very much pleased to introduce my colleagues that are on the other side of the screen. I really hope this emergency will soon be over, because first of all, I miss traveling a little bit, and Professor Da Silva, I miss a lot meeting you in Nairobi, and I miss, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to meet all the others as soon as it is possible. So let's hope that this will really end up soon. So the discussion of today will have, after my small introduction, we will have a panel discussion which will be moderated by Adedodin Adelekel, which is also Executive Director of ISNAD Africa and is a research fellow at Politecnico di Milano. He's one of the PhD students of Politecnico di Milano. So who are our panelists? Now let's introduce one of them one by one. Dr. Musonda Mumba is the director of the UNDP based in Rome, the Center for Sustainable Development in Italy. So I know how busy you are, and I'm really honored to have the chance to have this small discussion with you. And I really look forward to have the chance to meet you physically in Rome as soon as it will be possible. The second female we have today on board is Temilade Sesan. She's a consultant and faculty member at the Center of Petroleum and Energy Economics and Law at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. Temilade, I have heard from Adi a lot of nice things for you, and I really pleased to have you on this panel today. And I look forward to have the chance to be engaged more with you and with your wide expertise in the sector. Now to the men's side, let's go to the men. Ifeani Orayaka, who is a CEO from the Green Village Electricity Project in Nigeria. So we have many different stakeholders, let's say, and thank you for joining us today. And what is happening? The last one, but not the least, is Professor Isal Da Silva, who is a friend of Politecnico di Milano. He has already visited us quite a number of times, and he is a deputy vice-chancellor from the Strathmore University in Nairobi. I'm particularly proud of this panelist because I'm really proud to shut up and to listen from your expertise, because we are mostly talking about energy access, and energy access is also an issue which is probably most urgent in the African continent, and I think you are living there, or you are coming from that continent, and I think you can bring a very high-level contribution to the discussion. So I'm now giving the floor to Adi, which will be your facilitator and moderator of the session, and I shut up. Thank you again.
Once again, we want to appreciate you for joining us from different parts of the world. Once again, I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. We're a bit running behind schedule, so I'll try to be fast. Indeed, as Professor Emmanuel has discussed a little bit about the linkages between energy and development. Indeed, energy development nexus is complex. However, despite the complexity, we must do our best if we want to achieve the optimum impact and effectiveness. We must do our best to keep in mind that people, improvement of livelihood is the sole objective of energy access, energy issues, and particularly the overall development framework. Therefore, we'll be looking at this nexus from different perspectives, and it's our privilege and honor to have people from academia, people from research, who have been on the field, somebody from the international organization to talk about multilateral engagement with the government and policy. I will look at probably 3 rounds of questions depending on how time permits us. But first of all, when we talk about energy and development nexus, from a people perspective, what would it mean from our different backgrounds? I wouldn't know if Dr. Timlade could come in. I mean, you've had research on gender in different parts of Africa, looking at energy, cooking stove, and all that. So I would appreciate if you could come in to share a bit of insights of what this will mean from your perspective.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope everyone can hear me. Thanks a lot for having me. I've also heard lots of good things about the work that you're doing, at the university. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think when Professor Manuela was talking, I was actually quite gratified to sort of learn about, the background, of the whole chair and the fact that, the faculty is moving more towards a society conscious approach to energy and to engineering, which is not a usual thing or a common thing. I find that working both as a student and as a lecturer faculty, working with sort of more engineering type or even economics type fields, the sort of paradigms are different. So I think that this kind of setting where we've already cross that barrier, right? So we already have common ground. So I think like 50% of the work is done, if you ask me, from a sociology perspective. So I am a sociologist. And so I want to start in response to your question, Adedoyin, by citing or quoting one of my favorite aphorisms from Practical Action. Practical Action is it's an international NGO. They do a lot of bottom-up work, around energy and development. And they have this saying. They say technology is only half the story. Okay, and it's not that technology isn't part of the story. It is that it is only half the story. But I think in countries, especially developing countries, where we feel we have this thing to make up for, like there's this deficit, or it feels like, we're behind, like people actually use this phrase as lagging behind in terms of technological development. All of the focus, from policy, from even people themselves, many times tends to be on the technology and the technology alone. But several decades back, in academia and also in international development practice, we have this, we started having this rise of, more reflexive approaches to development. So, following on from the small is beautiful movement to, this rise of participatory development approaches, especially with rural communities. And so that sort of started implementing solutions around the fact that, okay, people are central to this whole process. But then moving on from that, it quickly became clear that, it was easy to get trapped in, quote and unquote, what some scholars have called the myth of community. So now to the specific point on gender. So the myth of community sort of tends to treat communities as homogeneous. And if we know anything about human existence, we know that that is simply not true. There's a lot of difference, and one of those differences is along the lines of gender. And this is really, really important, in the field of energy in particular, because so energy needs and energy opportunities actually really tend to be split along the lines of gendered roles and responsibilities. So I've done a lot of work, for instance, around cooking energy access, which is usually, I call it the poorer cousin of electricity access. And I've wondered many times in my work whether the lack of progress or the limited progress we have seen on cooking energy access, for instance, might not be simply because it's seen as a women's issue, especially in this part of the world where women are largely responsible for cooking. Like that's the gendered, that's just the norm. It's the gendered role. And I mean, that is, we can sort of leave that to one side. So what do we do with that? So I became really, really acquainted, I would say, with the day-to-day issues like faced by several women in energy access. Actually doing field work in Kenya, where I actually just spent like days with women, in the home front and the kitchen, and it really made me understand the dynamics, right? Household and how that spills over into the marketplace. And so, from my experiences, I'll just say maybe like four things, like four steps. I would say step one would be to take time to really understand how women versus men use energy. That's one. And in doing this, like, to try to balance quantitative approaches, which is very, they're giving high value again, with policymakers here, with more qualitative ones. And in doing this, it's important to check, there's an energy intervention, to check who really benefits from these interventions. So there's this famous, well, at least in my circles, famous story of a solar home system project in Bangladesh, for instance, where the whole the donor was happy that they had improved energy access to this village, and then turns out that actually at night, the men tended to use the energy to watch TV, so i.e. to relax, but then the women use that same access to energy, to mend the fishing nets of their men who had come in from fishing. So basically what happened was, having light at night extended women's working hours, but gave the men more recreational opportunities. So you have to ask, how equitable is that? Who does it benefit really? Second thing is, in looking at energy access, in ways that will benefit women, it's important to think beyond the household. There's a lot of people tend to get stuck at household energy access at that level. But looking at energy for agriculture, for productive use, where women are heavily represented, in these countries, is important. Step three, I would say, or point three, would be to think outside the grid. So that's a play on thinking outside the box. Potential solutions, actually, some of them have nothing to do with energy at all. So for instance, it's been found that one of the most effective ways to reduce dependence on biomass for cooking is actually to increase off-farm employment for women, because the whole premise of biomass use rests on the fact that the opportunity cost of women gathering that fuel is not high when they work on the farm or in the home. But if they work outside of the home, then there is less of free time in quotes to generate to get fuel wood from the farm and from the forests. So finally, just to say, I know I'm rushing a bit through this, but just to say that it's important, even though we're looking at this from like gender. When people hear gender, what they're mostly is women, but it's actually important to involve everyone, male and female, in the implementation of solutions if they are to be sustainable. So it literally takes a community to have gender-sensitive solutions to energy access. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Timladi. Thank you for the points you raised. Of course, these are very crucial issues that should be considered. I'll move to, we still want to stay within the academia and research before we go to the field and policy. So I'll move to Professor Da Silva. I forgot to mention, please, could you help us to manage within 5 minutes for the first round of questions? There will still be the next round of questions where we have more time to expatiate. So, Professor Da Silva, what would be the insights that what comes to you when we talk about energy development nexus and putting people at the center? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to be very brief and specific. I think, obviously, the topic of this this event towards the people-centered approach is the only valid actually approach, because the human being is actually into the center of this whole creation, as it were, the universe. And as Dr. Temilade said, technology is only half of the story. I'm not so sure if it is half, could be less, because you need people, and therefore we are moving towards multidisciplinarity more and more and more. So I want to give you to the question an answer, which is in Africa, which is the continent I belong to. I have been in Africa since 1997, and I really have the interest of having this challenge of universal access to electricity reached as a target of SDG 7, but all the other SDGs. So if you put people at the center, one thing that you have to do is to consider that it has to be inside out, meaning that you have to train people in a way that they become skilled, they become passionate, and they have the common good above their private good. So if you have these three conditions, then you have a task force which is par to this challenge of getting, in this case today, around 750 million people without access to electricity in Africa. So what this Strathmore University, which is the university I've been working for 11 years now, has done. Of course, one of the things that we have done was to have a lot more of partnership with Italy. So Professor Emanuela Colombo from Polytechnic of Milano is more than a partner. She is really an incredible person who has made us to do a lot of good things. She inspired me, and then we applied for a chair in climate change mitigation and sustainability, and thank God we've been granted that chair in Strathmore. So now we are working as a unit-twin university because of that. So if you want to build capacity to sort out a problem as the universal access to electricity in Africa, first you have to see the kind of boundary conditions which are now currently being the horizon or the dispensation we are working with. And this is the very simple idea of the 3Ds: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. So those three things, I don't think I needed to abandon them. Perhaps later I could talk a bit more about it, but these are the things. Nobody wants to support fossil fuel any longer. A very strong trend is going towards decentralized energy systems, where you can do away with the transmission, with the distribution, and with its losses, and therefore bringing affordability into the picture. And finally, digitalization, where you have such wonderful things happening now as the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data and analytics, all those things that when you put them together, you have incredible possibilities for this the energy development dynamics. So what we have done over the past 11 years with the NEL Foundation, we've been appointed the so-called strategic partner university with the NEL Foundation, and then we've been working with other partners also in the US and then in Italy, and then, for instance, RES for Africa. And then we started a bachelor's in electrical and electronic engineering, which is geared towards SDG 7, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and then centered people in the middle. The second things that we managed to do also, thanks to the government of UK, we got some good funds, and we developed a master's in sustainable energy transition. It's going to be launched now in September. And we did it in the partnership with the support of University of Cape Town. And finally, we have a project called Open Africa Power, where 200 plus young Africans have participated. We began with 29, went to 54, we went to 60, and now this year we have 90. Young and bright African from 25 different countries working towards the issue of universal access to electricity and in Africa. And then they are not engineers alone, they are lawyers, they are business people, they are ICT experts, and obviously they are engineers. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Da Silva. I really enjoyed the 3Ds, which are very crucial. And probably that will even lead us to the field where we'll be asking for the intervention of Engineer Ifeanyi Rajaka. By the way, he has many firsts to his name within energy, rural energy access, both in West Africa and Africa. What would, from your experience on the field, Mr. Rajaka, looking at various villages where you have set up mini grid across Nigeria, what has been your experience getting the people at the first, putting the people at the focus? And if you could also attend to something that Professor Da Silva mentioned, which is particularly about digitalization. How has it been? Your work has been in the rural communities. How have many of these people are not educated? How have they been able to, have you been able to manage to achieve success on the field, and what are the lessons learned? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
5 minutes because of time. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Thanks a lot, Didoyin and Emanuela, for having me. My pleasure to be on this panel. So to start off, I give a bit of quickly brief background about my company, what we do, GVE Projects Limited. We pioneered mini-grid for energy access in Nigeria, and at that date, we maintain over 60% market share of the mini-grid sector, providing electricity predominantly to over 12,000 households and businesses, mostly in rural parts of the country. So I think when the first speaker was Temilade was speaking, I think she tried actually to be a bit nice to engineers by saying that it's about 50%. I very much agree with Dr. Da Silva that is a lot more social than, as an engineer myself and hands-on in the field, I believe it's a lot more on the social than the technical aspect. And one of the very interesting lessons we've learned deploying energy services to off-grid communities close to a decade now is that energy is desired by all, irrespective of the social or economic standard of people, because particularly in the case of Nigeria, they are just quite unfortunate not to have, or not privileged not to have hard energy access. But in most of the instances, they try to bridge that gap by embracing fossil fuel-based self-generation to bridge the gap. And also, one interesting thing we've learned is that people create incredible parts and various use cases for energy once they have energy access. And most importantly, they try to be a lot innovative about what they use energy for. And interestingly, so our experience in deploying have shown that people who access energy from a commercially sustainable standpoint tend to be a lot more, tend to appreciate the energy access a lot more, because they tend to be a lot more efficient, use energy more efficiently and conservatively. And so some of the other lessons we've learned is that customer education is very critical, especially in locations who have been pretty much deprived of reliable energy supply for a long time. And I, to a large extent, love the concept of Race for Africa, because initially when we started the company about a decade ago, as young graduates, we pretty much believed or had the mindset that it was a lot more about providing the electricity access and hoping that the electricity access would lead to other aspects of development in the community. But we've come to, over the years, we've come to realize that it actually requires a holistic Nexus approach, where energy in collaboration with education, adequate amount of education, and economic stabilization will actually lead to the development that is desired. That leads to my next point, which is on talking about beyond providing value beyond just electrification. Because, for instance, one of our newest mini grid, which we completed about a year ago, we've seen firsthand how taking a Nexus approach have led to significant improvement in the community. We deployed a mini grid of roughly 350 kilowatts, hybrid system serving more than 2,000 households and businesses, but most importantly, serving a very vibrant agro-processing cluster located in the community. And we've seen firsthand how the inhabitants of these communities, especially the businesses and agro-processors, have embraced that to a large extent quadruple the productivity and impact they've been able to generate from their agricultural activities. And one of the lessons we've learned, I think, which also ties to your second question, Doyin, is that skills are available even in the most surprising of places, because deploying energy solutions at the bottom of the pyramid, we've had to strategically think a bit out of the box by trying to empower people in these communities where we operate with basic levels of skills that through which they can improve themselves as individuals, and also they can earn livelihood. As a policy internally, we try to use as much as 90% of the locals for the construction requirement of our mini grid deployment. And during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown last year, that proved to be very helpful in sustaining our operations, because we realized that with the restrictions in movement, we were able to engage our more enlightened technicians were able to engage effectively with some of these individuals who we have trained in this community to ensure to cater for the first level or minor issues in the community that had led significantly to ensuring we had reliable levels of service. And learning from that experience, we are now digitizing a lot of our operations to better equip similar individuals located in several parts of the communities where we have operations to be more effective in our operations.
Oh, thank you. Okay, you're done. Thank you very much, Mr. Rajaka. And to wrap up the first round of discussion, we'll go a bit more international from the academia to the field, which is the rural community. We now want to look at the perspective of the high NGOs, international organizations. We're very pleased to have Dr. Musonda, who has actually had some experience from UNEP and currently with UNDP. Could you please share with us what this complex dynamics of energy development would mean from your experience and perspective from the international organization? Over to you, ma'am.
No, thank you very much to the Politecnico Milano and to yourself, and also Professor Emanuela. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm the director of the Rome Center for Sustainable Development with UNDP. Perhaps, just listening in to my fellow panelists, I'm really impressed by all the work that you're doing. And perhaps I just want to contextualize it with some numbers. I think it's important for the listeners to understand that we have 759 million people still without access to electricity globally. 2.6 billion people are still without access to clean cooking solutions. And we know that the annual efficiency improvement is projected to reach about 2% between 2018 and 2030, far short of that 3% needed to achieve that target. And then lastly, but not the least, I just want to mention that in 2018, the international public financial flows to developing countries to support clean energy amounted to 14 billion. In the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of COVID-19, we've seen that global investment in renewable capacity has increased by 2% to $303 billion in 2020. So for me, what that tells you is very much that the figures here and ultimately at the center of these numbers are people, are humans that are dependent on the access or the absence of it. The United Nations Development Programme is an agency, it's a global agency that has offices in over 170 countries. And through this work at the country presence, we're working therefore with governments and really listening in and having an ear, but also looking at the realities on the ground within this conjuncture of development. But perhaps I should speak to a topic close to my heart. And I think just listening in to both, Dr. De Silva and also Dr. Sasan, the realities on the ground and the gender dynamics around energy. I think let's face it, the realities are that the absence of energy, energy issue in Africa, particularly around cooking, is a matter of life and death. And I will explain why. And we've seen how the numbers in terms of just pollution, the pollutants. In my past life, when I worked with WWF within some of the conservation areas in East Africa and many parts of the world, I saw this in Latin America, saw it in Asia, and also saw it in Africa, and see it more so now. And I think what is even more evident is the intersectionality of these issues. So when we talk about the issue of energy in Africa, we're also talking about the use of biofuel energy. And what does that biofuel energy mean? That means that it's coming from somewhere, from an ecosystem, most of which is forested ecosystem. So we've seen this intersection and connection to deforestation. And at the same time, we've seen an increase of loss of biodiversity in some places. And similarly, we've also seen health-related issues when, and which is why we have this zoonotic idea with COVID, when humans are much more closer to species, integrated species, that other pandemics break out. Now, in terms of our thinking within the United Nations system, and I think the United Nations Secretary General did say 2021 will be a make or break year. We have to be cognizant of the fact that when we talk about solutions for energy, we need much better systems thinking. Everything is interconnected. And as the topic of the day alludes to, people are very much central to those systems. And the decisions they make are very much informed by their capability to change or not to change, or an enabling environment that can make them be able to change. Before I close, I just also want to mention, I think if this pandemic has done anything, it's provide an opportunity to rethink how energy is actually sort of delivered, particularly in the developing region and in Africa in particular. And what we've seen is evidenced by, the absence of renewable energies in hospitals, particularly remote ones. Even access to, how do you switch on a ventilator when your power is gone? And you're having all the power cuts that you experience, and there are many colleagues in this space that can allude to that. When we talk about vaccines, even those vaccines, when they reach places, remote places in Africa, how can they be stored if you have an absence of energy? And similarly, and I just note from Professor Emanuela, she did mention, the agri-food supply chains. A lot of the food losses are really around storage and sometimes just the capability to process or to dry, particularly during the cold season. How do you do that? So this has to be very solution orientated, and I'm happy to speak to that a little bit later, and sort of some thoughts within the multilateral space, and also just within the UN system, as it were, and UNDP in particular. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to hear some of your perspectives about this, and particularly linking it to the the ongoing issue, which we hope it gets rounded off soon, which is the COVID-19 issues. So I'll move quickly to the next round of questions. We hope that we'll be able to take another one before the closure of the program. Looking at, having understood from various perspectives the issue of energy and development, and then how, people, it is essential to put people at the center. Now we want to look at how. So looking at the system, the framework as it is now, particularly from practice, what would we say are the missing links? What is it that we need to do less? What is it we need to do more? What are the new things we can bring in? Maybe this time I can start from Professor Da Silva.
Thank you very much for ambushing me nicely. Yes, okay. What should we do less? What should we do more? And what is the new thing we should start doing? Yeah, so anyway, doing less, I think is an interesting aspect, which is we have been in Africa going out there for people to solve our problems. And that I think we should do less. You see, Africa, yes, can work in partnership with Europe, with Asia, with America, true, but there is no shortcut. We have to be able to sort our own problems. And I have an example which is very telling. For the last 12 years that I've been in Kenya, I have seen every 3 years a consultant coming from different country to do something called least cost power development plan. So that individual comes in and stays about between 2 weeks, 3 weeks, working on the macro dimension of the problem, and then writes a nice report. It is launched by the ministry in a nice hotel, say Serena, and after off he goes, and then we remain with that report. Now, this is something that we should do much less. What is happening now that we are doing, helping the counties in Kenya, there are 47, to design their own count energy plan, that one became totally obsolete. We now do each and every county, we do help them doing their plan, but they use GIS-based, geospatial-based tools that can gauge everything, and they keep picking the data, and they keep updating it, not every 3 years, but every 15 minutes. So this is what we should do less. We have to train our people to be able to sort their problems and eventually help to solve the problems of other continents as well. What should we do more? Of course, I feel we should do a lot more in terms of providing financial structures which can work for us in terms of adopting the renewable energy and the energy efficiency agenda as a global trend, because as you know, we are about to have COP26 in Glasgow, and we have to report some things. Can't be that, and one of the things that I'm glad to tell you is that our university has partnered with UNEP, and we are doing a project called African Universities Race Towards Net Zero, and you are going to report it in Glasgow 26. And we pray we'll get a very nice COP27 in Africa next year. So a lot more of that should be done. So green bonds, yes, availing affordable money to this continent where money is so expensive. And then what could we do new, just new? Look, I feel that we should actually train people to sort out this problem, but from here, this idea of the Open Africa Power with the 230 something young people from different idiosyncrasies, different countries, they can do so much. I believe in there you may find a Steve Jobs, you may find a Mother Teresa, you may find Muhammad Yunus with his Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. You will find people who are skilled, very skilled, passionate, and committed to the common good. So that is my answer for your nice question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for saving the time. Yeah, we actually wanted to put that question within 2-3 minutes, and thank you very much for working within time. So perhaps Dr. Mumba could take the floor now. Just the same question. Yeah.
Sure. No, thank you very much. I think I just want to build up on what Professor De Silva has just mentioned. Within UNDP, because we do have a country presence, I think one of the things that we've really advocated for, particularly in Africa, is to really have favorable policy shifts. When we're actually going to have young people innovating, building their sort of own technologies, and then there's a barrier just in form of the taxation, the kind of policies, the absence of financial resources, access to sustainable finance, etc. I mean, that is a no-brainer. There's no way they're going to be interested. And I think what's also very important to note is that Africa is a young continent. The average age on the African continent is 19 years old. It's a no-brainer. Can we start rethinking how, universities are designing training around energy that is very fit for purpose and relevant to the spaces? How universities are looking at sensitization to young people, and also just providing these platforms of sharing. Professor, you're talking about this initiative together with UNEP. What does this mean? And I think what this pandemic did for Africa really is, with the lockdowns, we suddenly found ourselves in a space. I also happen to live in Nairobi. We found ourselves locked down, and then suddenly there was nobody jetting in, coming for that meeting or workshop, etc., doing that report. Suddenly there was a moment of introspection to figure out what solutions could we have? How can these value chains be shortened? How do we process our food systems? I think this is really an opportunity to rethink and find solutions that are apt and are timely and very much relevant, and also very much, change making, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me call on Dr. Timladi Sesson. What should we do less? What can we do more? And what are the new things we can do?
Right, thanks. Just to say that a lot of people have been doing stuff. So mostly, the INGO types supported by the international organizations, so the UN system and others. And so far, for instance, in Nigeria and across Africa, we have organizations like Solar Sister. Solar Sister is a user-focused and women-led organization that does this last mile delivery, literally, of energy, like small energy solutions. I think that obviously more of that, can be a good thing. So more of that in different pockets, it's fine. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for less of that. But what we really, really could use more of is broader government action, really. I think that when it comes to framing energy in a development perspective, I think African governments have, there's a lot of room to grow, a lot of room to do more. A lot of the slack has been picked up by just different other actors with lower levels of resources, with lower levels of legitimacy, but just from this legitimacy perspective, African governments really, developing country governments are in a good place to do more. And just to specify maybe three specific ways in which I think that they could do more. Just in terms of one, strengthening like physical linkages, between rural and urban communities. Physical infrastructure, something as seemingly routine or mundane as roads, like having better roads linking different places. One, it helps to transport things like smaller, energy solutions better without the risk of breakage, but also even just a transfer of practices. So we talk of moving populations from, say, more traditional ways of using energy to more modern ways. Actually, better flow of people from rural to urban areas helps to transfer, practices, aspirations, so that whole exchange of ideas is made easier by just having that physical linkage better. Second thing is, sectoral linkages. I think this whole idea of looking at things in silos, and energy is a real casualty of that. But meanwhile, as we've been talking here, energy is connected to so many other development sectors. And so, policy starts needs to be looking at, just joined up ways of promoting energy within a broader development, so looking at it in relation to employment, health, education, agriculture, food security, nutrition, things like that. And the third one, I think Professor Da Silva talked about it at a high level, but, like just breaking it down now to capital linkages for users. So just end user finance. So the Grameen Shakti, for instance, that provides low interest loans for people to acquire solar home systems is one example. But also more innovative subsidy mechanisms that can be driven by, like the state machinery. So things like voucher systems, things like just subsidizing initial adoption of things like maybe LPG cylinders, for instance. There are many creative ways, but I think that just taking that initiative and that leadership in the space would really help to move the energy agenda forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. And lastly, Mr. Engineer Rajaka, what would be, from your experience, what do you think that we can do less, we can do more, and the new things? What is needed?
Yeah, thanks, Doing. I think one of the good things of speaking last is that the fact that the earlier speakers would have articulated most of the points nicely, and I must allude that they've all clearly touched on like the critical issues, but to add some different perspective to it, I'm coming now from a policy perspective. We can all see what's happening in the mini-grid space in Nigeria, which is in recent time attracting a lot of both internal and international attention. And equally, recently, NG announced that they will be deploying about 300 mini-grids, and we have several of those international players coming in. And that primarily can be alluded to the fact that the government of Nigeria decided to be a lot more open by creating enabling policies that are more investment and private sector positive, and that has led to a catalytic effect in attracting a lot of players from the private sector to actually drive the rate of energy access as desired for the country. So I would say this sort of policy initiative should be amplified a lot, and bringing it home also. Most of the capital being deployed in this space in Africa as a date have been or is international funds being imported into the continent, and in most cases, most of these those of them that are private capital would have to be repatriated at some point and at some cost. So some of our indigenous financial institutions should also brace up to the challenge to try to pillar financial structures that are in line with the dynamics of the energy access development sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We indeed have, the last round of questions. However, in order to also put people at the center, we would like to invite, if there are questions, to see if there are questions that from participants. There are some that are with us in the class, and there are some that are joining from across the world. So if there are questions, could you signify within the chat? I'll probably attend to the person in class here while we're waiting to receive your questions. Okay.
Just to let everybody knows that we are really working in this blended modality, because we have people in the room attending in person, and we have also people online. So we are now very familiar with this way of doing teaching, and I think also our workshop is going in that direction. So there is someone here in the room, Luca. Can you come? T'ho visto. I recognize you beyond the mask, behind the mask. So maybe you can come at my place. So, no, they can see you. They can see you over there.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for your very interesting and inspiring words, and also Professor Colombo, sorry, Professor, and Mr. Adeleke for introducing and moderating the call. I would have, if it's possible, even two questions. Maybe I just start with one. Yes. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I forgot to look at the camera. The first one is for Professor Da Silva. You mentioned early in the call that putting the human person at the center of the energy development nexus is the only way to go for if we want to be serious about it. So I wanted to ask you, of the three main players that nowadays pursue electrification projects, that will be national governments, private players, and NGOs, as far as I know, at least. Which of the three do you think puts this human-centered approach more in practice? And about the other? I mean, I would expect NGOs probably to be the answer, but if that's so, what do you think it's holding back the other two players from actually pursuing this human-centered approach? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. I really appreciate your question. And I have I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and I have already made the answer to you. You see, what we have been doing regarding this huge problem of access to modern types of energy or access to electricity in Africa is to consider an idea that a certain scientist called Mike Potter from Harvard Business School developed, called triple helix. The triple helix brings together the academia, which normally does R&D, project development, and some innovation, brings together the private sector, who are very good at doing business, and they are really able to transform society with that. And finally, they bring in the government, because the government is the only one that can do things that if me as a private sector or as a academic I probably will end up in jail, like giving a tax exemption, getting land for free. But this is possible if the government is there. And then at the center of it, you see the NGOs that are there in the middle, trying to make those things happen. So I wouldn't say which one is more pro-people, less people. I would say it is important that all of us work as pieces of a puzzle. If we put them together, you have the whole picture. If you leave one behind, you are in trouble. You may not achieve the target you are aiming at, which in this case is the universal access to electricity in Africa. Thank you.
There is another question from you.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So I have another question. Okay, yes. For Dr. Mumba, you mentioned the environmental dimension as being crucial, and I totally agree with this. And also the pollution issues, the deforestation issues, so all the issues linked to environment. Do you think that this discussion about the environmental concern has been brought on the field, I mean, in a real-life electrification project as far as now, or do you do you think that we are still far from trying to achieve an environmental awareness in the local communities that need to be electrified? Because the way I expect it to be is mostly that this awareness is built when you make the community understand that the safety and the well-being of the environmental resources around them means also their well-being. But I'm not sure that on how far this has been brought on the field as far as now, and so I wanted to ask you your opinion on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, for that question. I think the reality is on the ground, we know this for sure, is that people know that deforestation does lead to a loss of livelihood. It does lead to health implications, etc. And also, I mean, just based on my work from both UN Environment and when I worked in WWF many years ago, we did, when we spoke to communities around, really just talk about this intersectional element of looking at energy, mainly biofuels, as I mentioned, but also looking at the connectivity to health, mainly because when we worked with other different partners, particularly around the pollution issue and very much on what Dr. Sassan also talked about, that women tend to be at the center of this. And so the other challenge goes back to what Dr. De Silva also mentioned, this this triple helix and the element of policy and the element of that public policy. When governments do not make specific decisions around, for instance, renewable energy, the challenge isn't that people don't know. The challenge is that people may not be aware of what's available, but also this element of decentralization. What does it mean for a specific county government to make sure that its constituency have access to solar panels? What kind of solar panels? Are those photovoltaic cells, accessible? Are they subsidized? Is it possible for them to actually have, resources from the government to be able to buy them, etc.? So this is where the challenge lies. And I think now more than ever, particularly in this pandemic, when we've realized that it's when we tinker and deal with nature in terms of what's happened with the COVID pandemic. There was a report that was released by UNEP just when the pandemic started in terms of zoonosis. Now we've realized this connection, but also realizing that if we don't take care of the natural environment, it will not take care of us. So it's a people and planet dynamic. And here we are finding ourselves in this very complicated quagmire. And so lastly, but not the least, I just want to say that I think now more than ever, I mean, the examples that, for instance, Engineer was talking about, the fact that, you're really engaging at the community level, but making sure that there's a synchronicity with the policy element is something that UNDP country offices are always trying to do in reality with government to bring these realities to the fore. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. And thank you very much, Professor Da Silva and Dr. Mumba. There is a question here from Blessing. Now, it says, please, can you expatiate on practical steps that could be taken to incorporate gender diversity and just energy transition into the dialogue of humanizing energy, especially in the face of the huge socioeconomic disparities that exist across the globe? I think Dr. Timilade would probably want to take this first.
Yes, so I've been reading the question, and it's a big one for which there are no sort of straightforward or one way or one-sided answers. So just to say in the first instance, I mean, gender diversity is, it's as, the need for gender diversity is as old as, it's millennia old, as the history of the world. But recently, just globally, as a race, as a human race, we've been making progress towards, tools sort of to deal with it. And one of the sort of trends, that we've seen in the past couple of decades has been the issue of the idea of gender mainstreaming. So almost any field that you can think about, energy, health, agriculture, whatever, there's gender mainstreaming principles, tools, what have you. But I think it's important. There are those principles, there are those toolkits, those handbooks. I think the more important thing is to find comes back to the policy and politics. Find the political will to actually implement, at whatever level, what those mainstreaming principles might be. And I get, Blessing, I understand the depth of your question. It can be quite hard, when you're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion issues, when the bottom line is at stake, especially, as if I, be able to say, when you have private capital involved. I would say again, I mean, this is maybe my socialist side, coming up again. But I would say that in many ways, it is really governments that can help to even out, these outcomes, right? So while we're sort of planning for the big infrastructure or the big investment, what have you, there does always need to be an eye on, just for instance, if there is going to, if electricity, from many grids is going to be coming at a cost, landing at a cost that maybe, maybe women-owned businesses, agro-processing, those small Gary people or cassava, locust beans, if I know I'm talking about the really small micro scale, maybe can't afford, then there does need to sort of like be a leveling there. The private sector is not going to bear that cost. So the onus is on other sources of capital, which many times tends to be like, the government, sort of within the remit of government. So you do need that political will to proactively even the ground. So just short answer, the principles are there, the tools are there to have greater gender diversity, but we do need the will to implement them for more just outcomes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I don't know if there is any other question from the audience.
Maybe I can also just respond to the blessing question a little bit and add a bit on what Dr. Susan has said.
Thank you, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, I just want to add very quickly that I think one of the challenges that we faced, particularly on the African continent, and I think Dr. Susan can agree with me, is really having these, packages that, for instance, banks prepare, some pink balloons in a corner, access to women, you can access finance, etc. But without actually having had a conversation with them in terms of their needs, how can they access them, what mechanisms are in place, these transformative financing mechanisms. I think now more than ever, there's bigger discussions, and I think we're seeing it particularly from the food and agribusiness side, where the private sector and also the public sector are beginning to understand, how do we include women at the very co-creation, that co-design and co-creation, to be able to actually provide a solution? You cannot just say, oh yeah, here's a package and you just sign on this dot, etc. Our cooperatives, groups of cooperatives of women, could that be considered as a company? What does that actually mean in terms of them accessing this sustainable and transformative finance? And then the last thing I want to mention is the issue of data. I think a lot of times what we do, and for you as universities, I think this is also interesting. I think it's important to also note that a lot of times, a lot of the statistical centers across governments, any sub-Saharan African developing country, is that you see that because women are either not, part of the statistical conversation in terms of what they're doing on a specific sector, and particularly in the energy sectors, sometimes they're not counted. So what does that mean in terms of providing a solution? So that data is so critical. It's so critical to actually make that policy shift. And that has to really happen on all levels. Over.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your response. There is a question here which I think would probably Engineer Rajaka would like to speak to this. Somebody's asking from here, says, during your experience in the field, have you encountered a particular technology which is changing completely the rules of rural electrification? Have you seen in your professional experience during the implementation of mini-grids a particular technology that is proliferating more than other? I mean, technology preference. So, I think you can speak to this, Mr. Rajaka.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. This is a very, very interesting question. So it depends on how you look at it. If you're considering energy access purely, then specifically field experience have shown that small solar solutions like pico lamps and small-sized home systems are able to deliver energy assets at scales faster than some other solutions. But if you're talking about holistic energy inclusion, which tries to solve some of the challenges we're talking about and on this panel about the energy nexus, then you're talking about mini-grid solutions, which not only provide energy access, but also have the capacity to drive socio-economic activities in the communities. And talking about that as well, on mini-grids, we've seen in recent times the need for more modular technologies, which have the potency of minimizing the pace of deployment of these solutions in line with the aim to meet universal energy access by 2030. But to touch more on the previous questions as well, from experience also, we've seen that most of our loyal and committed customers across multiple geographies where we have operation have been women, and in most cases these are women who prior to having electricity access in their communities were not involved in any form of economic activity beyond just farming. But with the introduction of electricity in their communities, they tend to innovate, to figure out businesses that they can start, that can leverage on energy assets in their communities to improve their livelihood. And having observed this trend in multiple locations across our multiple mini-grid sites, we are internally now working out on modalities to amplify. But at the same time, we're being a bit careful not to cross some cultural lines that have been existing in some of these communities in the time of past. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Mr. Rajaka, and all the speakers for your interventions and your insights. We still have a couple of questions. However, because of time, we have just 5 minutes more and we need to round off. So I'll give the floor to Professor Emanuela to probably highlight some of the issues, just to tie issues together as we close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adi, and I apologize myself with Blessing. I have seen there is a question from a friend of us, which is Blessing from Nigeria. She holds a PhD in Italy, and she's still working, I think, here. So Blessing, sorry for not giving the space to your question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to highlight shortly. I mean, the many things that you have mentioned, the many very interesting things that you have mentioned. I just want to, highlight some of them, which will be part of my takeaway messages. I mean, almost all of you have mentioned about the needs. Obviously, we are speaking about the energy development connection. So it's important for those who are doing our job, which is that of being an engineer, to understand what are the needs of the people, not in terms of the energy demand, but in terms of their needs, in terms of water, energy, food nexus, in terms of access to healthcare services and things like that. This is leading us to better understand also the other way around, which is how energy, or our electricity will benefit, and will benefit in a different way, male and female. And this was an example done by Ifeani. But also by Temilade. And then also Ifeani has mentioned that it's important for a businessman, because it comes in the discussion from the perspective of the private sector, to use a nexus approach, which is also good, not only for understanding better the needs of the people, but for the business sustainability itself. Another very important element that come with the needs is the intersectoriality. We need much better system thinking, was said by Musonda, if I remember well. And I think this is also very important, especially from us. We have an engineering background, a technological, we are technology driven, but we start understanding that technology is just one piece of the overall system, is an instrument, but not the final end. And then Professor Da Silva mentioned topics that I know it's also a joint passion of both of us, which is capacity building. Not for the sake of delivering training hours for the people, to the people, but for the sake of building the next generation of those who will be able to design the destiny of Africa, that need to be designed by African people, as the Agenda 2063 is mentioning more and more. So these are some of the important elements that I have underlined from the first round of questions, and I think that for the second round of questions, many of you have mentioned the issue of policy. We know, and this is also said by the International Energy Agency, our future still stay with the government, because some things cannot change. For instance, the issue of cooking, they cannot change by the market sector. We still need, governmental intervention and government action, which need to be done not in a silos way, but more in an holistic manner, looking at all the cross-sectorial linkages. So having said that, I just really want to, again, thank you very much. And I just want to say last thing, I think we have an option. I mean, we are engineers, so we are practical people. And each time we talk, we would like also to say, okay, and then what's next? What's next step? What we are going to do? So I think that together with Adi, we will have the chance to talk with you and to try to establish further opportunity from different perspectives. For instance, Temilade, I know that I think we have a chance to do some research together, because we need to complement our technological asset with your perspective, which is more on understanding the cultural implication of the energy solution. Ifeani, I think we can work with you, because as you have seen from Luca, from the question by Luca, we have a lot of students that are coming out from this energy and development track in energy engineering, and they are willing to work also in Africa and to be part of the business. So maybe we can have some interaction with the students. We can exchange the students for giving them the opportunity to do a stage or a training period, and so on and so forth. And I can say that they are quite good and quite committed, as Professor Da Silva was saying. Dr. Musonda, it was a real pleasure to meet you. I am super happy also that you are in Rome, so I don't think it will be difficult to have the chance to meet. I hope in the next weeks or in the next month, and I would be happy to create synergies with what you are doing at UNEP and what we are doing here in our research activities. And Professor Da Silva, I don't know if he is still there. I mean, we have a list of joint cooperation already, but I think we can even do more now that you are going to start your Master of Science in Energy Development, Sustainable Energy. So thank you again for being our guest. I have learned a lot of things, and I think we will keep on learning from you in the future. My deep thanking to Ade for supporting the moderation, and my deep thanking to Emanuela Nebuloni, who supported us from the technical perspective. Thank you.